So yeah, good morning everybody, or as I like to say, utram dobrem ne bywaet. So today I'm here to talk a little bit about technical SEO and a few words about me. My name is Martin Splitt. I am a developer advocate, or avocado depending on who you ask, at Google in Zurich. I work for the web ecosystem team, which basically means I work a lot around search and fwdays and web standards and stuff. And I'm really, really happy to be here today to talk about a thing that is very near and dear to my heart. So you might have different preferences for the pets you choose, right? But basically everything that is fluffy and furry and nice and gives me a lot of love is something that I will love back unconditionally. So I basically collected over the years a pretty sizable collection of doggos and puppers and cats and kittens and whatever, right? And I think it is very sad to just have them on my computer. For one reason, I should probably do backups. For the other reason, I think it's nice to share good things with everyone because the world is a little bit of a tough place in these days, right? So I thought I'd make a website. Because obviously sharing the love of doggos and puppers with others online, the web is the best platform to do that, right? I mean, who here has an iPhone, an Android device, a Windows mobile phone? You know, that's okay. That's a perfectly fine operating system. But who here has a browser? Right? A few people do not show their hands, and I'm like, okay, interesting choice for a conference then. But basically, a website can more or less reach everyone. But it's really simple these days as well to make one. So while I would have to sign up for the App Store programs for the different platforms if I wanted to make an app, all I need to do to basically get started with my web development is figure out which framework I like the most, because it basically does a bunch of architecture decisions and trade-offs for me. I should understand these trade-offs, that being said. But basically, I can install the CLI tool, I can create a new project, I can have a local server running, I build my application as I go along, and once I'm done, you know, do you remember the good old days when you copy and pasted stuff from your text editor from Notepad into an online tool that concatenated and made things smaller? Eventually we got build tools like Grunt and stuff as well, but all this is mostly bundled into these framework toolings today. So basically I get minification, code shaking, tree shaking, code splitting, all that. I get that pretty much for free. I just run this command and I get productionized assets for my web app. That's pretty cool, right? And then I'm done. All I have to do is I have to deploy it somewhere, and deploying can be as simple as pushing to some Git repository, and then the entire machinery of deployments kicks in, depending on what kind of platform I use to host my things. And these might even be free. If you're using GitHub Pages, you get that for free as long as you don't need a backend. Static websites hosted for free. That's pretty nice, because I remember I'm from Germany originally. And I remember the first time I wanted to put something more complex online than a very simple website, I had to actually physically print a contract, sign that, physically mail that to the company. And after 2 months, I got my virtual server that cost me an arm and a leg, only to get a guest book online that I wrote in PHP. Yay, right? Now it's free. I can do that for free, and it's really, really interesting, and it's really nice to quickly get going. So then I good morning, Martin. Then I utram dobrem ne bywaet. Pravilna. So then I buy the perfect domain, in this case cutedoggos.club, for instance. And obviously with a domain like that, everyone's going to find me, and I'm going to be rich and have a yacht in a few years, because I can put ads on my website as well. But then this happens. So having done all this work, and having built the perfect happy place on the internet, that makes me sad. Right? I want people to use the work that I created. I want people to get to the information that I shared. So that raises the questions, how do you actually find new websites? So obviously I'm not, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, so my websites don't necessarily get traction and traffic automatically. So how do I make sure that people find my website? And one way of doing it is probably you might get the people who search for the things that you put online. In any search engine, that can be Bing, DuckDuckGo, or this startup from Mountain View. So that's a good big question. And how do I make sure that my website actually shows up in search? How does that work? As a developer, I want to understand the process behind it. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend Googlebot. Googlebot is fantastic, and Googlebot is really, really friendly and really, really nice. And let's get to know her or him a little better. So first things first, we start with a list of URLs that we think are useful. That can be like any pre-curated list, or it can be a list where people like submit their stuff to. Doesn't matter. We just have a bunch of URLs. This is called the crawl queue. What we do is, every now and then when we have the capacity, because it turns out computing power isn't infinite, so we have a bunch of computers running in the cloud, and these computers take a URL from that queue, and then they do an HTTP request. They do an HTTP GET, and fetch whatever comes back. Now, in the olden days, that was pretty much it. You have the HTML now, so what we can do is we can figure out what this website is about, looking at the HTML, and then we can look through the HTML for all the links that we've got. And as we find these links, we can put them back into the queue, and then we index those, like we crawl and index those. So like this was a continuous cycle. We start with some websites. These websites link to other websites. We get this content. We understand what this content is about. We get the links from it, and then we do the same thing over and over again. But these days, websites look slightly different sometimes. So what is this website about? Well, doggos and poppers, obviously. I told you my website is about doggos and poppers, so you can clearly see that here, right? Well, that's bad news, isn't it? So does that mean that Google search can't index my pages because it doesn't see this kind of content? Well, no, because we actually run JavaScript. Whee! That is good news, isn't it? However, it turns out the internet and the web specifically is quite big. So I don't have the latest numbers. These numbers are from 2016, so quite outdated. And as we know, the web grows. So we had 130 trillion URLs that we had to crawl. And if we would like run JavaScript for all of them, we need another round of computers to do so, right? So we can't run all the JavaScript in one go. We can't run it immediately because there's a ton of websites that don't need any JavaScript. So instead of making it slower for everyone, we're trying to like balance the two aspects. Do we crawl slower, but then all with JavaScript immediately? Or do we make a second round of indexing where we crawl the JavaScript later on as we have resources available? So we go for that. We say, OK, look, we crawl, and if it looks like we need JavaScript, then we render that as well. So basically, we have another queue. So as we come through here, we queue your website again. And as we have the resources available, we run a renderer. The renderer then is basically a headless browser. It runs the JavaScript, and it produces the HTML after JavaScript has run. And then we do the same thing again. We look if there's any links in here. We then put them into the crawl queue. And now we are sure that we can understand what this is about, so we're going to index it. We're going to figure out, so this website is about doggos and poppers. So whenever someone's looking for doggos and poppers, this website might be a good fit. How good of a fit it is, that's a completely different question. That's what happens in ranking. We're not going to talk about ranking because that's a can of worms, right? Ranking is the art of figuring out which website is better for the question I asked Google. We're not going to talk about that. For us developers, the only thing that is important and that we have a lot of influence in is making sure that our websites are in the index so that they can be ranked, okay? So ranking, very different kind of worms. We talk about indexing most of the times. And when it comes to indexing, what indexing means is like we look at the text, we look at the images, blah, blah, blah. But we also actually gather over 200 factors, over 200 what we call signals. And all of these are being mixed into ranking. So you want to make sure that you like tick the boxes for as many signals as possible. So people can find my doggos now. That's fantastic because my website gets indexed because we run JavaScript and woo, everything is fantastic. Except that if you search for what my website is about, which is doggos and poppers and cute doggos and poppers and that, there are a few competitors. So my next question as a developer who wants their work to be seen and used by people is, how do I make sure that people find my website and not just like someone else's website? Well, the first thing first is you can do like a lot of technical things, but if your content is crap, if your content is crap, all the technical changes, all the technical improvements are basically polishing a turd. So you have a very shiny turd, but it's still crap. So instead of doing that, I would say we make the content better. Now look at this website. So this website has a few interesting characteristics, I would say. So first things first, like it has what agencies love. This like smart, simple, beautiful. It's like, oh yeah, right? Like it will disrupt your breakfast. It's thermochemical food processing and the best invention since sliced bread. I'm still not exactly sure what this is exactly, so I might look at the rest of the website. And if I look at the rest of the website, I see like, okay, so they have a home page, cool. They have a philosophy, okay. Then they have the hot bread X10, whatever the hell that is, and I can join the movement. This is a toaster. I want to buy a toaster. And I want one that doesn't burn my bread and is really fast because I don't have time to wait for freaking toast. So I want a fast toaster that doesn't burn my toast and I want to buy it. Where on this website do I do this? I don't want to join a weird cult of people who are into what they call it, thermochemical food processing. It's toasting. Get over it. You build a toaster. So what can we do to improve the content? Well, one way of doing it is to say, like, what the frick this is about. This is the freaking fastest toaster ever, right? So, okay, wait, let me change to highlight. So it never burns my toast again, and it gets the toast faster, and you know, I should try it out. And now, if I'm feeling like, oh, I'm not sure if this is the right toaster for me, they have something up here that says, like, how to choose a toaster, our toasters, and buy a toaster. So I can figure out, because honestly, I'm not ready for a commitment to buy a new toaster. Like, that's a huge commitment. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So I want to figure out, like, how do I decide if this is a good toaster? And if this one isn't, where else do I find other toasters? So they give me all this information. And the moment I'm ready to make this commitment of buying a toaster, I can just click that button. I'll be good. So what do we learn from that? This is a fake example, obviously, but what do we learn from that? And I see that on websites quite often, and then people are like, my website isn't getting search traffic. And I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. First things first, you need to make sure that you understand what the users who come to your website actually want, right? You know, you can't just make random stuff and then go like, people will find it, right? No, if it's weird and like a movement and stuff, no, people are not looking for a movement to buy a toaster. They want to buy a toaster. So you should also use the word and the languages that people are speaking when they describe your thing. If I'm talking about buying a toaster, I'm not talking about joining a movement. If I'm talking about a fast toaster, I'm not talking about thermochemical food processing. I mean, it's technically correct, which is the best kind of correct, but it doesn't really resonate with me, right? So use the words that you would expect the people to use to find your content. Also make sure that you are giving them additional information, because I might come to this page and then decide, that's not exactly what I want. Maybe I actually should ask myself, what do I look for when buying a toaster? But if there's a link there that says that, I might click it, which means I stay on your pages, which means it's very easy to like show a button that brings me back to buying a toaster. Versus I go like, this page is not quite what I wanted and there's nowhere else to go. So I go back to the search results, which means that you're using these people, right? So make sure that you're taking these points into account when writing your content. That's not something technical, but that's something very important. And oftentimes marketing departments don't know that. And they get very excited about very fancy sounding words, and I would like every developer to call them out on it. If they're like, thermochemical food processing, and they're like, we're making toasters. Call it a toaster. All right? The other thing is, make sure that you're looking for performance. This is something technical, and this might actually make sweeping, or might require sweeping changes in your code base. So most frameworks, go for client-side rendering by default. Client-side rendering by default has this downside that you like stare at basically nothing for quite a while. When do I? Yay, doggos, finally. That was quite a wait, wasn't it? It's like the first moment, I came here to look at doggos, at cute doggos and puppers. And the first moment I actually see one is here. And depending on the internet connection, I mean, I've seen good internet connections here, I've seen bad internet connections here. Mobile internet in Germany just sucks. So basically in Germany, this can easily be like 5 to 10 seconds and until I see the doggo, and that's like, no. And it actually is stress-inducing. I have my wonderful heart rate monitor, and I noticed that when I'm on trains in Germany, my heart rate on average is like 20 20 heartbeats faster than the rest. And I'm like, why is that? And I figured that's because I sit in the train, come on, no, I lost connection. Ah, damn it, I have to reload now. That's what stresses me out. Don't make me stressed out in German trains. Thank you very much. And that's why I moved to Switzerland. In Switzerland, I'm like, I'm in the middle of the mountains and I have 4G and it's fast. That's lovely. But you can help. You can help by considering hybrid rendering or server-side rendering. Because it turns out the problem with client-side rendering isn't the JavaScript itself. It's the fact that JavaScript needs to be downloaded as an entire blob first. Then once we have that blob, we need to parse it into executable code. And then we have to execute it to start making additional network requests to fetch the content. And then that means like we're doing additional network requests pretty late in the process. That's not exactly fantastic. If you have a lot of content in HTML, the HTML can start displaying as it is received in the browser. It's a streaming parser. So basically, the moment there's an image tag in the HTML that arrives over the wire, after a second or so, it's like, oh, I need to download this image, and then it starts downloading the image in the background. So that's a lot faster than having to like download the entire HTML, then get the JavaScript, and then like execute that, and then actually getting the images. So definitely invest in looking at hybrid rendering and server-side rendering. And there's frameworks that make this particularly easy, like Nuxt.js or Next.js or Angular Universal, if you're using one of the three bigger frameworks. You also want to make sure that your content stands out, because we have seen there's a lot of competition online, right? So we had like 2.8 million or billion or whatever, I don't even remember how many other cute doggos and puppers websites. So you want to make sure that if you are shown in search results, that the user thinks, yes, that's the one I'm going to click on. So let's look at a few search results here. So what's the first thing I'm going to look at? Well, I'm looking at the titles, right? So having titles that make sense matter a lot. So in this case, I'm like, okay, yes, all of the cute, or 40 of the cutest, fluffiest, and cuddliest puppers and doggos. 40, that's a pretty good number. I get through a few hours of that. That's pretty good. The second one is just like cute doggos on Twitter. That might just be like a random bot. It might be spam. It's just a Twitter username. I'm not sure if that's a good one. The third one is kind of good as well. It's 21 joyous photos of doggos to put a smile on your face. So they say specifically to put a smile on my face, which is kind of what I want to do. But the other title says 40. So it's like quality versus quantity. So how do I make my decision? Well, the second thing I can look at is the description or the meta snippet or whatever you want to call it. So these snippets are really helpful to figure out what's going on here. In this case, I look at that one and I'm like, 40 of the cutest dogs alive, whether they are puppies or adults. So like they're even alive. So that means I can potentially travel somewhere and pet them. Now, that's really good. The other one is like, we recently asked subscribers to the BuzzFeed Animals newsletter to submit photos of their super cute pets. If you ever met someone who owns a cat or dog, or like not owns, like who has a cat or dog in their life, they all think they are cute. Oftentimes they're not. So this one suggests that it might be like objectively chosen. I don't know how you would objectively choose the cutest, but you know, it sounds better, so I might actually click on that one rather than on the third one. So make sure that all your pages have meaningful descriptive titles and meta tags. That actually makes a big makes a big difference. And now we come to like some very basic SEO things that you need to do in your code, if you're especially if you're using a framework. Right now, there's like 3 very popular frameworks. So let's talk about all 3 of them. So if you're using React, who here is using React in production? That's a lot of people, that's great. React is a fantastic framework. However, you want to make sure that you do have meta tags, and so like the meta descriptions and the titles per view. So as you have different products or whatever, like different articles, whatever you're displaying, you want to make sure that you have a meta description and a title that matches what is on this particular page. To do so, you can use the React Helmet component from the NFL. It's on GitHub. You just install it from NPM or Yarn. And then you can use it like this. In your view, you say like, hey, I have a title, which can be any of the props of my component. And then I have a description, and that can also come from my component props or attributes. So that's pretty cool. You want to make sure to use that particular plugin or any plugin that does similar things. It's not specifically that plugin, but just make sure that you're doing this. Because if not, if all your titles are the same, you're going to have a bad time. We saw that just now in the search results. If all you do is like show the username, that's not really a good title either. For Angular, Angular has it built in. Who's using Angular? That's a few people. That's great as well. Angular basically gives you the title service and the meta service. You can use them in your component, and you can use them like this. You set the title, you update the tags, and then basically that's it. So you have your very basic basis covered. If you see in the testing tools that I'm going to describe later on that your website stays blank or has a weird syntax error, that might have a reason. They might have to enable one of the polyfills that is disabled by default. I think it's like array fill polyfill. Who's using Vue? A few people as well. I hope to see more hands, but that's fine. Vue is a lovely framework too. It has two things that you want to look into. The first thing is you want to switch your router to history mode. That uses history API and proper URLs. The default, the hash routes, will give you trouble. I'll explain in a moment why. Once you've done that, you can use a component such as Vue Meta to actually get the meta information. That uses the reactive system. So basically, if you have any computed properties or properties in your component, then you can use them here to dynamically update the title and meta description as well, so that you have meaningful search result entries. That's really nice. That's pretty much it. That wasn't too bad. That's pretty basic. Who here is doing that in their code today? That's my problem. Everyone who's not raising their hand right now, take note of these slides. Very important. Do yourself and your company a favor. So now when we talk about server-side rendering, I mentioned that already. Server-side or hybrid rendering can help you a lot. If you are using React.js and you do like marketing websites or landing pages, consider switching to Next.js. It has like hybrid server-side rendering built in so that you get the content into the HTML faster, and that is better for your users and for crawlers. If you're using Angular, try Angular Universal. It's pretty much the same thing. You just augment your application and then basically set up a server, a very minimal server that does some server-side rendering of the data for you as well. If you're on the Vue.js camp, Nuxt.js is pretty much a clone of Next.js, and that's a fantastic tool to get there as well. If you do not want to make changes to your code, but can make changes to your server infrastructure in a more easy way, and you see that you're having trouble getting your content into search engines. Especially, so we have seen the issue with JavaScript client-side rendering in search bots is some search bots don't do it. Some search engines can't do it, and especially the social media bots, the ones that like render the page into like these little cards in social media platforms, they can't run JavaScript as far as I'm aware. So they wouldn't see your content at all. Google Search does see your content. However, it takes longer until we can do updates. So if you have a website and like that changes every hour or something, then it might take longer for us to actually pick you up and render. So the search results will not always be up to date. So to make that a little faster and basically get the content into the HTML without touching your actual code, you might consider changing your server configuration for dynamic rendering. It is a workaround. It doesn't give you any user experience benefits. So users will still suffer from JavaScript having to download and render everything. But at least search bots and search crawlers will profit from it. So this is how it works. In your server, you look at the user agent string. If it looks like something that you are not aware of, it is probably a browser and a regular user. So you can give them the wonderful single-page application that you built. However, crawlers announce themselves in the user agent string. So you have like a list of crawlers. It doesn't change very often. And then you basically go like, oh, so this is a crawler, so your server can serve something different. And what you do is you send your regular code to what we call a renderer. This renderer can be something like a service, like prerender.io. That's an external service from a third party. It can be something that you build yourself with, I don't know, Phantom.js or Puppeteer. Or you can use something like Rendertron. It's an open source project that we are maintaining at Google, and use Rendertron to like run a headless Chromium to then produce static HTML that you send to the crawler. So even if the crawler does not understand JavaScript, it gets the content. So that's a pretty nice thing. If you want to learn more, we have documentation on that as well. So, but that's a workaround, still a workaround. If you're worried about things like if you present that and your SEO person goes like, but that's cloaking, then they're wrong. Cloaking is something very specifically different. Cloaking is when you tell the crawler, this is about doggos and puppers. And then when the user comes, buy this blue pill, or buy these drugs, or hey, here's online gambling. That is cloaking. If the content looks a little different, that's not cloaking. So as long as you don't mislead or trick the user, you're not cloaking, it'll be fine. Okay, cool. There's tools, as I said. You can build your own from Puppeteer, or you can use something like Rendertron. And now I'd like to move on. So now that we have done like the basics, I want to talk about a few things that I have failed at and other people have failed at. So I think it's time to talk about common pitfalls and issues. So what if your pages aren't being discovered? So like you have your website there, it is being linked to by others, but it just doesn't show up in search. Well, first things first, or like only the homepage shows up in search. First things first, make sure that you're actually using links. It's 2019 and I'm surprised that people make this mistake, but it happens. This is a good link. It's an A tag, it has an href that is a URL that I could paste into my browser and get somewhere. Fantastic, good link. This is also a good link. Yes, your single page application wants to do something on click, that is fine, I don't care, it's still a link. If I disable JavaScript, this link will still work. Or if like the JavaScript fails halfway through, doesn't matter, this link will still work. No, that's not good. This link goes nowhere. I mean, sure, it has an on-click handler, that's great. But that's it. Like, where does this link go? The crawlers go, I don't know. I have no idea what this is, but whatever, let's ignore it. No. That's still not going somewhere specifically. That's just like, it's okay. We're just not going to, like, this doesn't show us a different page. This just goes like, okay, so this is a link that links to the top of this document. Whatever. We're just going to ignore it. No, that's not a URL that we can go to. No. Oh, no. No. No, 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 no. Not on my watch. Only over my like cold dead body. This is uncool. This screws over everyone who's using assistive technology and the bots. Very uncool. Do not do this. I'm gonna haunt your dreams if you do. So only use these two. They are safe for pretty much every use that you can imagine. So okay, I did that, but I'm still like only my homepage is discovered and all the other views are invisible to the crawler. Well, that might be because of the URL. So these are typical good formed or well-formed URLs. The first one has a host, example.com, and a path, traditional -URL. The other one has a subsection, has a fragment identifier. So that says that we want to jump specifically to a part of existing content. So all the content is there, and we just want to go to a very specific part of it. So we're not going to another page, we're not going to different content, we're just going inside the content, we're going somewhere, okay? However, when we came up with the idea of single page applications, we had no method of doing that with JavaScript, like basically intercepting navigation events. So how did we do it? Well, we said, look, we get an event from the browser whenever this fragment identifier changes. So, okay, it's not really a fragment identifier, so we might add this like exclamation mark to like show people or to make us believe that we're not doing something terribly dirty, but we are doing something terribly dirty. So, no. Abusing that for single page applications is a bad idea because if the hash changes, the content changes. That's not how URLs were designed. That's not how browsers are designed today. So instead, you should use the history API. With a URL like this and a click handler on your links, you will get all the nice JavaScript that you want to run. You can even like populate and push state into the browser history, so the browser back and forward buttons still work, and everything is nice and clean and fresh. But Martin, what about browser support? That's a very good question. It looks pretty good. There's a few exceptions. If you're under Internet Explorer 11, I'm very sorry for you. If you're using Opera Mini, you're probably on a really slow or resource-constrained phone. The good news is, if your server is configured correctly to handle these URLs, the link you click will still just take you to this content. It's just not going to have a nice transition. But honestly, if you're running Internet Explorer 8 or 9 or 10, JavaScript, have you ever executed JavaScript in Internet Explorer 8? Like modern JavaScript. Good luck, right? So I rather than my computer spinning its fan and taking 30 seconds to get me to this other URL with a really nice transition that is probably going with like 2 frames per second, I'd rather have it reload the page and give me the new content. I want to work with the web. I know a lot of people don't, but I want to work on the web. I have maybe a slow computer and maybe an old browser. I want to work efficiently on the web. History API will not get in the way here because it's a proper link. It's going to use the browser API, the browser history. Everything will be fine. So that's exactly what progressive enhancement is about. more modern browsers, and there's a lot of browsers, including IE11. Who would have thought I would ever call IE11 a modern browser? More modern browsers will do fine. Everyone else gets a slightly degraded experience, but still better than what we would substitute it for with JavaScript. Okay, now I can see in my server logs my URLs, my pages are all being indexed. That's fantastic. Crawled, but I'm still not finding them in Google. So maybe they don't get indexed. So what can happen is what I like to call sneaky 404s. Multiple people have had problems with that. We have a webmaster forum. There's plenty of posts about this. When I go to the homepage, the server responds with HTML and JavaScript, and then some JavaScript runs and hijacks all my links. Maybe even a service worker is in play here and like even does that with a cache and does some API calls in the background and fills templates that it had downloaded before. That's fantastic. But what happens when I go and click on a link like /about is it might be that this JavaScript does something that actually doesn't really ask the server. So like the JavaScript takes care of showing the new content, and I'll be happy. But what happens if I copy that link into a messenger and a friend of mine like pastes that link into their browser and hits return? Is the browser is going to go to /about on the server. If the server isn't ready for that, it's going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. That might not have, you might not have seen that by testing because you have been like on your homepage, you might have had the service worker installed, so like everything looks like it works on your machine. Works on my computer, I don't understand the problem. But everyone else is seeing a 404. That's not good. So make sure that your server is configured correctly to handle the URLs that you're putting into your front end. That is a very important step. But what if that goes wrong and some of my error pages are being indexed? I would not want my errors to be in Google search, right? We call that soft 404. So this is a page that says HTTP to HTTP 200 OK. So the crawler goes, woo, we're good. This is a content that exists. And then the page goes, whoops, this content doesn't exist. That's not great. I mean, generally speaking, we should give it a 404 or 410 if the page has disappeared, right? That's the clear, obvious thing. By the way, you should make sure if you're changing your URLs to use a 301 or 302. Because we like Googlebot and other bots know something about the page. And if it goes away and then the same page appears somewhere else, then Googlebot goes like, it's gone. Oh, shiny new page. I don't know anything about it, so I'm going to start a new file. But if it's a redirect and the content stays more or less the same, then it's going to be like, oh, this has moved. I'm going to take the information I've got and move it over here. So redirects are actually important. It doesn't really matter if you're using a 301 or 302 for the search engine. It doesn't matter for the users because browsers cache that decision and like don't even ask the old URL if you're entering it. But basically, you want to give us that. And then give us a 200 if it's OK. The problem is, in a single-page application, you can't easily change the HTTP code, right? You have gotten the HTTP code from the server, and now you find out that it doesn't work. So what can you do? Well, one way of doing it is basically what you want to do is you want to redirect or reload the page from the server. The server should figure out that this page doesn't exist. You can do that with a query parameter or whatever. It doesn't matter. Use your JavaScript to reload the page and have the server say this page doesn't exist. JavaScript redirects work in Google search. You'll be fine. There's another possible way of doing it, and I would actually not recommend it. There's a no-index meta tag. Be really, really careful with this. So I had a case where someone said, so our single-page application only knows if this product exists after asking the API. So what we do is we say, do not index this page in the HTML, and then once the response is good, so once the API says this product exists, we remove it. So this will be fine, right? So this is the implementation. That's really simple. You have your meta robots. You say, do not index this page. And then as the API call comes back and says this product exists, then we remove that robots tag. OK, that's a simple solution, but not a good one. Why is it not a good one? Well, very simply, if you do that, what happens is the crawler gets the HTML. The processor sees, oh, I don't want to index this page. That's cool, so I don't need any more work, which means the JavaScript never ran. Which means all your product pages are gone from search. So yeah, be very careful about it. What happens if the page stays blank? Unfortunately, the big news is we are still using Chrome 41. We are working on fixing it. I know. It's like 4 years old. It can now walk and talk. Like it's in kindergarten. It does well. But it's time to move on to a new one. We are working on that. I can't give you a timeline on when we are making that change. A lot of the Puppeteer work and Headless Chrome comes from our rendering team because they needed to make these changes so that we can update our Chrome. But please, please, please transpile your code and watch out for features that might not be supported. So how do you find out what your site does or what your pages do in search? The easiest one is mobile-friendly test. It's free, it's out there, you can just paste the URL and then you see, obviously it's in the name, if it's mobile friendly, that's great. But you also see a screenshot. So you see if your content above the fold shows up, so that's really helpful. So if this is blank or like misses some very important bits and pieces, that's a problem. The screenshot for performance reasons is only above the fold. If you want to see the entire thing, then you can see the rendered HTML as it comes out of our renderer, right? This does not mean that we are indexing your page. This just means like we have asked the rendering backend to like quickly do a render, and it like skips a lot of the steps, but it gives you an accurate rendering of what we would see when we render your page. You also get JavaScript console logs. So everything that you get in your browser DevTools console, you get them here as well. You see like the errors, here's an error. I can now like debug and fix this. If I use things like ngrok, I can have my development environment exposed to the internet and then use that in the mobile-friendly test, for instance, to find out how my page is doing. We also have the Search Console. The Search Console is amazing. It shows you why a certain page is not indexed. This might be a sneaky 404, like submit URL is not found. It's a 404. And you're like, what? No, when I click on the, oh, JavaScript, right? So this helps you debug these kind of things. It also shows you site-wide, so all your pages that we know of, how many of them have errors, how many of them are in the index, how many of them we know of but don't put them in the index. You can debug these things more easily. You also get analytics. You can see what are people searching for, where do my pages show up, how often do they show up, how often do they get clicked in search, and you can inspect them live. So you can paste a URL into this, and then you get either what we have in the index, or you can run a live test and see what we would get into the index if you wanted. Search Console also sends you emails if like weird things happen and errors happen, so that's kind of nice. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. You can find plenty of resources online. You can always ask me questions after my talk. I'll be around the entire day. Thank you very much for your attention. Are we doing Q&A? I'm running over time, so I'm not sure if we're doing Q&A. Okay. So how is everyone doing?
So, any questions? Raise your hand. Okay, I see one.
Great, thanks on the talk. My question is the following. You didn't mention any benchmarks on website speed. And is it really important these days how Google crawler measures it from the time of first interactive, from the time of static HTML load? What is the guideline there? Thanks.
So thank you very much for the question. It's a mixture of different. So I said make an investment into server-side or hybrid rendering because speed is a factor. That being said, we have over 200 factors. So you can say like website speed isn't everything. If you are one of the websites that is like hot bread X10, join the movement, then it can be really fast. It's still not going to rank well for buying a toaster. But it is important. Page speed is important. It matters. It does affect your standing in Google and other search engines probably as well. It's really tricky to express how exactly we're measuring it, but it's a mixture of different metrics that you would see in tools like Lighthouse or Page Speed Insights or Web Page Test. So making the website, so the thing is, don't worry about optimizing page speed for Google that much. Optimize for your users. As users are interacting with a page as quick as possible, and it starts rendering as early as possible, then you'll be fine.
Cool. Any more questions?
The light turned out. Someone moved the light switch.
Hi, Martin. So
Hi.
What are the essential meta tags that you recommend to have on every website? And is it the same for a website and a web app, for example?
It is the same for a web app and a website. The meta tags that matter are definitely, so it's not really a meta tag, but I would like to call it out anyways. It's the title, it's the meta description, meta keywords. At least we are not using meta keywords anymore. I don't know how the other others do it. If you get a lot of traffic from social media, you probably want to look into the Open Graph tags as well, like Open Graph title, blah, 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 Open Graph description. But for Google, the most important one is the description and the title and the viewport. Mobile friendly is a thing. It's one of the over 200 factors that we are using. So definitely consider having at least a meta description, a title, and a meta viewport, and then all the other meta tags for the different social media platforms if you care about them. All right.
Cool. I think Martin needs some time to have a break between talks, so you can find him later on different community stages. So let's have a break for 10 minutes right now, and on other stages we'll have Stefan Judis and Timofey Lavrenyuk and discussions about Framework Day. So have a break and join the discussions or other talks, other tracks. See you. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.